Hello, this is Ken Schoolland, and I'm here with Agent Thomas.
agenttomasz.pl. Aloha amigos, my special guest today is Ken Schoolland.
That's right.
That's how you pronounce it. An associate professor at economics at Hawaii Pacific University and the president of ISIL. That sounds scary.
We changed our name to Liberty International because ISIL, the International Society for Individual Liberty, had been sort of overtaken by the terrorist group in the Middle East. Our website got hacked a lot, and also we had to change our name. Yeah.
And also, you're an author of a book, Przygody Jonathana, which is the original title is The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible.
That's right. The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, a free market odyssey.
And chicos, I got to tell you one thing, because Ken is the first guy I've met when I entered the hotel 3 days ago, and I recognized this guy, and I told him that I didn't read his book. So that's the sad part. And actually, I managed to read 3 chapters. So.
Oh, good. Yeah.
We're going there.
Right,
We're going
good.
there. I wanted to ask you about this book, because this book seems like an idea, like my idea, you know. I never had, actually, but and I'm glad that it has been translated to Polish language. And I would like to ask you about the ideas behind that book. Let's say, I don't know, sell that book to my listeners.
Okay.
It's worth it.
Well, it's now published in more than 50 languages, more than 80 editions, with 3 plays, one touring Africa, 5 countries of Africa to the university performance studios, one touring Slovakia to the high schools, and another musical production in Kazakhstan that's been produced in Kazakh and in Russian that was actually taken to Finland in a competition in a play with about 25 young people. So it's reaching out in a lot of ways. It's also started off on radio. I originally started writing radio commentaries as an economist and found out that people weren't really interested in just commentary. So I wrote it into a story, like Gulliver's Travels, an adventure that would tell a story. And the book has about 100 different points, economics themes that it portrays in very humorous and satirical style. And the interest in the all-news business radio station in Hawaii picked up, and I thought, well, I've got on to something. And then Small Business Hawaii picked it up, produced as a publication. And then other countries were very interested because they wanted to introduce free market ideas in a friendly, non-threatening way that could perhaps get around the censors. And the one thing that's unique about humor is that often people can grasp ideas about economics without getting too caught up in the details and getting angry or frustrating. And that's where it's gone.
But I've got a feeling that we have started with Act 3, actually, because we haven't actually presented the product yet. Because it's a book for kids.
Well, actually, it was originated as commentary for the business community in Hawaii. And then the book was published with the intention of getting it into high schools, but I use it in my economics classes at the university, and the students love it because it's much more user-friendly for learning about economics ideas. This youth edition that you have in your hand with the color illustrations is intended more towards a high school age, but Ludmila Melnikova has produced a musical production for elementary school kids, so it reaches all ages. It was first serialized in the Hong Kong Economic Journal to the intellectual elite of Hong Kong.
My daughter is 3.5, and I think I could read some excerpts.
It appeals to many ages, and I'm pleased to say too we've just now gotten a very substantial donation that has engaged a Hollywood animation team that they're making a movie out of it. So hopefully it'll be something that your daughter may enjoy too.
So there was no kids at the very beginning in your plan. So it was not.
Not a youth book. No. Well, my university classes, I was trying to figure out. Well, what's university students? They have a fun side to them. They hate dry, boring textbooks. I mean, I don't know what your experience was like, but that was my experience when I was in college. Economics class, when you ask people, did you ever have an economics class, they'll usually grasp their throat and say, oh, yeah, it was an awful experience. It was boring and dry. So I thought, There's no reason it should be like that. Why shouldn't it be fun? It's something that affects all of us, and there's so many interesting ways of telling the story, so why not fun? And when you think about it, too, throughout history, it's humor and satire that has done as much as anything to change the world. A very famous book, a book that I love is called Hammer and Tickle, Jokes That Brought Down the Soviet Union. I'm fascinated by that because what they were doing, they were pointing out that tyrants or bureaucrats or autocrats of any kind and stripe, the one thing they hate the most is being laughed at. And the victims of their controls and their bureaucracy are always, winding up having to have to turn to humor to mock them, because that's often the only tool they have.
You easily end up in prison for certain jokes in Soviet Russia.
That's right. That book, as a matter of fact, was written about the people who wound up in the Gulag, either for telling the joke, for laughing at the joke, or not reporting the joke, 10, 20 years.
It sounds funny today.
Yeah. Crazy today, doesn't it? That you could do that. But and actually, my wife says that this sort of thing is starting to come back in China, this sort of social control. And over the comments, I mean, for example, you cannot on the internet make any parallels between Xi Jinping, the president, and Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
And Peppa Pig is also restricted.
Yeah.
Which is my daughter's favorite character, actually. So no China for her.
Yeah.
Not in this lifetime. Yeah. Better luck next life. So that's cool. No, in my opinion, this book, I should lie, and I should say that I've read that, actually.
Well, it starts off with an interesting tale about productivity, but in a friendly way. Jonathan sees this woman being dragged off down the trail, and she's screaming out for help by these big burly men that are taking her away. So he runs up the trail trying to find someone to help him rescue her. And he comes to this big clearing in the woods, and he sees all these men standing around the trees, beating the trees with sticks. And he goes up to the guy in charge and says, "Well, help me rescue this woman." And, No, she's been arrested. Arrested for what? Oh, threatening the jobs of all these men here. You can see we knock down trees by beating them with the trunks with sticks. A good-sized tree can take 100 men over a month to knock down. But she came to work one day with a sharp metal piece attached to the end of her stick. A hatchet, she called it. And then she knocked it down all by herself in less than an hour. Clearly, this threat to our traditional employment had to be arrested. So that's an economics point about the resistance people have to innovation and new ideas.
It's all over news again. I mean, the robots are about to take our jobs. Tools
That's
are about
right.
to take our jobs. And as we know, value comes from being tired.
Milton Friedman one time saw, he was visiting China, and he saw all these men working on the road with shovels to dig the pathway for the new road. And at the side, he saw this big tractor that they could have been using, but it was sitting there idle. And he says, well, why don't you use the tractor instead of all these men standing around with shovels? And they said, well, no, we're trying to have jobs. If we use that tractor, all these men, well, what would they do? Well, so Milton Friedman said, well, if you really want to just create jobs and you don't care what you're producing, why don't you just have them use spoons instead of shovels? Yeah, or the hands, yeah. And clearly they're missing the point. People in the market, in the competitive market, if it's their own money and their own energy, they think of alternatives of how to spend their time. But when the government does it, they don't have to worry about it. It's not their money, not their gain. It's somebody else's money, so they often don't think of the innovation that can come from opportunity.
And are you afraid of singularity? This idea that there's going to be like a rise of machines, like Terminator 3 scenario.
Actually, not at all.
So we need to introduce this UBI guarantee income for everyone. You know the story.
Oh no! A UBI, the Universal Basic Income.
Basic income, exactly.
That's different than the machinery and technology.
But the premise is that singularity will bring people.
Oh, I see. If the machines are doing everything, then
so you cannot tax a machine.
Yeah.
Even though it works 24/7 without maternity leave, you cannot tax the machine. So we have to tax somebody else and give that money to people for free.
Well, the great Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter characterized this as creative destruction. In other words, everything that goes by the wayside, is replaced by many new things. But you have to kind of think, let the entrepreneur come up with the innovation and the ideas, how to create the things that we don't yet see. Most people, 150 years ago, no one could have ever imagined the 747 jet, before people were flying. Now, 150 years later, everybody's used to it. We're all flying. No one would have imagined it. That's the beauty of the marketplace and the spirit of innovation that comes about with millions of people, each creating a new little increment of positive change. And that would happen, if robots come along. Look what happened with the internet. I mean, we've got these little iPhones that just 20 or 30 years ago was a landline. A line that came into your house. You had to apply to the government to have a line to talk to somebody. And now, once they eliminated the government monopoly and opened up the competition to all the innovation, now everybody's got cell phones with hundreds of things, creating thousands of jobs all around the world, doing all kinds of things we never could have imagined before.
Yeah, cover screens, applications, selfie sticks, whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
It was unusable with the old line phone, actually. The selfie stick with a line phone.
Yeah, that's right. The pictures were very clear.
Mom, I'm going to watch a movie on my phone. While being on a train. 25 years ago, that was like, son, lay down and have some rest because you're mumbling.
Right. And that's just exactly how the path of innovation is going to occur in the next 10 years. Things that we can't imagine now will open up tremendous new opportunities for us that if we just think, the machine's going to replace this, I mean, we'd all be using, for example, buggy whips. What cars are going to replace buggies? And what is the old worker creating buggy whips going to do? Well, there's 1,000 more jobs that have opened up in the automobile industry as they replace the carriages.
Online there's a number of petitions of like buggy whip unions.
Yeah.
Saying that, as we know, we need to save the jobs, right?
Yeah.
And that's it.
No, that's right. So
tax the automobile, whatever.
The first person who came up with the steamship and went up, I think it was the Elbe River. He docked at the first port and thought everyone would be praising him for all this new innovation that could go upstream, downstream, with more cargo. The first sailors that saw it burned it to the waterline. They said, that's a threat to our jobs. So there wasn't another one for another 80 years because people were afraid to make that leap of change. But when they did finally accept it, it opened up vast more jobs in unimaginable ways that never existed before, because then transportation was worldwide instead of just up and down the river.
I found a picture in your book, actually, with a closed bridge, right?
Yes.
It's like a similar story to it. And it reminded me of Frederick Bastiat.
Precisely, yeah. It's his tale.
Really?
Stulta and Puera, and that's the Latin for silly girl. These two cities that one city said, well, we're going to protect our workers by putting up boulders on one side of the road so people can't take their products in. And then the people at the other city were saying, well, maybe I should retaliate by putting up boulders all over our side of the road as well. And clearly he was pointing out, well, putting up boulders was a bad thing, but it's not made better by putting them up on the other side too. That's the problem with trade retaliation. And his example.
Have you already sent one piece to Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Maybe,
I think he's off his rocker. Yeah, I'll put it do a tweet. No, he's
great at reading books.
He's
best. I'm best.
I don't think he's ever read a book, actually.
He wrote several.
Well, yeah, okay, but I don't know. Maybe somebody else wrote it for him too. I don't know.
Most Kiyosaki and other things. And it's all about success and making deals, good deals, with closed bridges, of course, because that's the best scenario for doing best deals.
And other countries around, by offering to retaliate or just falling into the trap, they're going to do the same kind of thing. Bastiat pointed out that the cities that are the most prosperous are the ones downstream. Like Hong Kong is downstream. It's easy to get to. Not the most prosperous cities on the mountaintop where it's hard to get to. That would be like putting up trade barriers against yourself. And so he says, the whole history of geography proves that being easy to get to is the most prosperous thing. So if one, so it doesn't make it logical to make it difficult for you to get to. Unilateral free trade is better than retaliation. And so Bastiat is the best at with this candlemaker's petition, where they say, well, all this free light and heat from the sun is threatening jobs of the candlemakers and coat makers. We've got to ban the sun, put a window tax, have people close up the windows so they have to buy our candles and coats. Well, that's an anti-free trade argument, a protectionist argument. And protectionism, as Henry George used to say, does to our own nation in peacetime what the enemy would do to us in wartime. What's the first thing that an enemy wants to do in wartime? Put up trade barriers. What is Trump doing to the United States? He's putting up trade barriers on our own people. Trump puts trade sanctions against North Korea and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba to punish them. And then he puts up trade barriers against Americans. It punishes us. It's turning the gun against our own people.